trapped in the woods for the night. No phone signal, no flashlight, and not even a granola bar in your pocket. It's dark, freezing, and you're stuck with nothing but a wool hat and a bit of rope. Now imagine trying to survive this not in 2025, but in the year 1325, with zero electricity, no gas, no YouTube survival hacks, and definitely no overnight shipping from Amazon. Here's the wildest part. Medieval people didn't just survive, they thrived. They got through brutal winters, deadly plagues, and crop failures with sheer ingenuity, and some hacks that still outshine half the modern survival gear on the market. Today we're diving into 16 forgotten medieval survival tricks that actually worked and might just save your life if the power ever goes out for good. Hack 1. The underground fridge. Root cellars, forget stainless steel fridges and fancy walk-in pantries. Medieval folks had the earth itself to keep their food fresh. The root cellar wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was survival science disguised as a dirt pit. These underground storage spaces were carved into hillsides or dug deep into cool soil. Why? Because the earth naturally keeps a stable temperature, cool in summer, above freezing in winter. This made it perfect for storing root vegetables like carrots, onions, turnips, and potatoes, which would otherwise spoil in days without refrigeration. Some root cellars were lined with straw to prevent rot. They even stored smoked meats, cheeses, ale, and butter down there, anything that could benefit from a steady, cool environment. Generators, no electricity bills, just a genius use of what nature already provided. Hack 2. Mud, moss, and manure natural insulation. Modern homes rely on fiberglass and fancy thermal panels, but back then, moss, straw, and, yes, dung, were insulation gold. Peasant homes were usually built using a method called wattle and daub, a wooden frame packed with woven twigs and plastered over with a mix of clay soil and animal manure. Sounds gross? Maybe, but the results were solid. Thick, sealed walls that blocked out wind and trapped heat like a medieval thermos. Roofs were layered with thick bundles of thatch that worked like shingles, naturally water-resistant and excellent at keeping in warmth. Moss was often stuffed into cracks and beams to plug gaps, adding to the insulation. In wealthier homes and monasteries, thick stone walls and layered wall hangings created incredible thermal stability. No HVAC, no problem. Today's eco-builders are rediscovering this primitive wisdom with straw bale construction and natural plasters. The medieval world? Accidentally eco before it was cool? Hack 3. Preserving with salt and smoke. Long before refrigerators and deep freezers, the medieval answer to meat spoilage was simple: salt it or smoke it. Salt was a miracle tool. Meat was rubbed down with dry salt or soaked in salty brine, then packed into wooden barrels and left in cool cellars. The salt drew out moisture, making it nearly impossible for bacteria to grow, but the real flavor and preservation power came from smoke. Entire smokehouses were built just for this purpose. Meat hung from racks above a slow-burning fire, soaking up flavor while drying out and becoming nearly indestructible. The result? Ham that could last for months, even through winter, cheese, fish, sausages, all got the smoke treatment. Some peasants even smoked food as a backup in case crops failed. If a fire broke out because someone forgot to check the smokehouse, well, dinner was probably ready. Today's artisan butchers and survivalists still rely on these methods. Medieval folks? They were just doing what had to be done, and doing it deliciously. Hack 4. Medieval medicine cabinets, healing herb gardens. Before pharmacies, before penicillin, and way before TikTok doctors, there were monks, midwives, and plants. Tucked behind monasteries and peasant homes were compact herbal gardens that were literal lifesavers. They were medicine cabinets rooted in dirt, garlic to fight infection, yarrow to stop bleeding, calendula to soothe wounds, comfrey to help set bones. These were everyday plants with powerful effects, and people knew exactly how to use them. Monks preserved ancient texts filled with remedies passed down from Roman, Greek, and Islamic medicine. Midwives learned from generations before them, mixing tinctures and pastes that could ease a fever or even dull the pain of childbirth. And here's the twist: many of these remedies actually worked. Today, science confirms what medieval healers already knew. Plants like garlic and yarrow really do have medicinal properties. No CVS, no urgent care, just dirt, leaves, and a whole lot of inherited wisdom. Hack 5. The power of fermentation, nature's probiotic pantry. Fermentation was one of the greatest survival tools of the medieval world, a delicious accidental discovery that allowed peasants and monks to preserve food, improve digestion, and survive long winters without fresh produce. Let's start with cabbage. Instead of boiling it into mush every day, medieval folks packed shredded cabbage into clay jars with salt. Over time, the mixture would ferment and transform into a tangy, crunchy dish we now call sauerkraut. This not only preserved the vegetable for months, but it also boosted gut health in ways they didn't even understand at the time. Then there was milk. Left unrefrigerated, it would spoil quickly, but medieval people knew how to turn it into kefir, a sour, drinkable yogurt loaded with beneficial bacteria. This wasn't just a way to make milk last, it was a way to stay healthy when options were limited. Fermentation also applied to drinks. Honey, water, and natural yeasts were used to make mead, a sweet alcoholic beverage that doubled as hydration and energy source during long winters or exhausting labor. And while monks carefully recorded fermentation recipes in illuminated texts, commoners passed down methods by word of mouth. Each village had its own style, its own twist. In modern times, we spend $7.00 on kombucha and praise it as a superfood. But medieval folks were doing it first, in clay pots, by candlelight, using instinct and survival instinct as their only guide. Hack 6. Animal fat candles. Light, warmth, and multifunction survival. When the sun dipped below the horizon in a medieval village, darkness wasn't just inconvenient, it was terrifying. Wild animals, thieves, and freezing cold were just the beginning. That's where tallow candles came in. Made from rendered animal fat, usually beef or sheep, tallow candles were a cheap, accessible source of light for people who had no access to beeswax, which was expensive and often reserved for the church or nobility. The process was simple but clever. Fat was melted down and poured around a wick made from twisted linen or dry rush. Once cooled, the result was a surprisingly long-lasting candle that not only lit up homes, but also gave off heat and repelled insects due to its pungent scent. Tallow wasn't just used for candles, it also powered simple oil lamps, smeared onto cloth to make fire starters, or even waterproofed boots and cloaks when mixed with other natural ingredients. Some lanterns were crafted using oiled parchment or thin slices of horn to shield the flames from wind, allowing travelers to carry light with them across fields or through the woods. Despite the smell, these tools were essential. Without them, navigating even a few feet after sunset could be life-threatening. Even today, off-grid survivalists swear by tallow-based candles and lanterns for emergency lighting, especially since they can be made from materials you can gather, hunt, or grow yourself. Hack 7. The onion method. Strategic layering to survive the cold. There's a reason modern outdoor survival guides emphasize layers, but did you know this tactic goes all the way back to the medieval era? Back then, staying warm was a full-time battle, especially for peasants with limited resources. Their solution? The onion method, wearing multiple layers of different materials, each serving a specific purpose. It started with a base layer of coarse linen, which wickered away sweat and moisture. Over that came 1 or 2 woolen tunics, thick and scratchy but warm even when damp. On top, a heavy cloak, sometimes lined with fur, and if you were lucky, you added mittens, hoods, and leather boots stuffed with straw or wool. Why did this work? Each layer trapped air, creating a natural insulation system. Linen kept you dry, wool insulated, and fur sealed in body heat. Even more impressive was how strategic medieval folks were. They knew to remove layers while working, then pile them on the moment labor stopped, preventing sweat from soaking the inside garments and freezing them later. This was common sense at the time, but modern science confirms it. Layering works better than any single thick garment because it lets you adjust to your conditions without sacrificing warmth or mobility. Today's ski jackets and thermal base layers are just high-tech versions of what medieval people already figured out, with nothing but sheep's wool, common sense, and trial and error. Hack 8. Rainwater harvesting. The ultimate lifeline. Clean water is something we take for granted today, but in the Middle Ages it was a daily concern. Rivers were often polluted with waste, wells could run dry, and carrying water from distant sources was exhausting. The solution? Rainwater collection. Every thatched roof was a built-in rain trap. Barrels, buckets, and clay pots were placed directly beneath the roof's edge to capture rainfall, especially during the wet season. Some wealthier homes went a step further, using stone-lined cisterns buried underground to store hundreds of gallons of rainwater. They even got smart about preventing contamination. Wooden lids were used to keep out leaves, insects, and frogs in monasteries and castles. More advanced systems used filters made of sand, cloth, or charcoal to help purify the water. This collected water was multi-purpose. While not always safe for drinking, it was used for cooking, washing, watering livestock and crops, cleaning tools, and even brewing ale. In winter it might be melted snow instead of rain, but the system was the same. Bathing wasn't frequent, but when it did happen, it often relied on stored rainwater, sometimes heated in a pot over the fire and poured into a wooden tub. Fast forward to today, and rainwater harvesting is making a comeback, especially among off-grid communities, eco-villages, and preppers. Systems are more advanced now, but the principle is exactly the same. Catch the water that falls for free. Hack 9 Communal Labour, survival through shared strength. In the medieval world, no one truly survived alone. Isolation meant vulnerability, both physically and emotionally. That's why one of the most powerful survival hacks wasn't a tool or a technique, but a culture of communal labour. In villages and rural hamlets, families didn't just take care of their own needs. They helped build each other's homes, harvest each other's crops, and defend each other from external threats. If one family's roof collapsed in a storm, the rest of the community showed up with tools and timber. If a villager fell ill during harvest season, neighbours reaped their fields before their own. It was not just generosity, it was practical, mutual dependence. Because next time, it might be your barn that burns down or your livestock that wanders off, and when that day came, you'd want your neighbours on your side. Even lords and churches promoted this system. Many organised shared granaries, bakehouses, mills, and even feasts during famine relief. Though they often took a cut or imposed a tax, they provided stability that kept entire regions from collapse. Today, we think of community as a social concept. In medieval times, it was a survival mechanism. Bartering food, sharing tools, protecting each other. This spirit of mutual aid helped people thrive where the individual couldn't. Modern-day co-ops, homesteading collectives, and even mutual aid disaster groups echo the same principle. When survival is shared, resilience multiplies. Hack 10. Smoke, horns and bells. Medieval emergency alerts before cell towers, sirens or wireless alerts. Medieval people had to get creative to spread warnings fast. Their answer? A 3-part alert system using sound, fire and location. Let's start with the bells. Every village had at least one large church bell, and it wasn't just for prayer. The number and rhythm of rings signaled different things. One long ring might mean prayer time. A frantic clanging could mean fire or an enemy raid. People understood these audio codes instinctively because their lives depended on it. For wider range alerts, they used signal fires or smoke plumes lit on high ground. If enemy troops were spotted at a distance, a fire would be lit and seen by neighbouring watch posts, which would light their own in turn. This created a visual relay, an early warning system that could stretch for miles in minutes. And then there were the animal horns, conch-like instruments carved from cattle or goat horns. Blowing one could carry sound across valleys and forests, whether to call for help, signal danger, or just gather people for communal work. In a world where minutes could mean life or death, especially during a bandit attack or a wildfire, these low-tech systems were life-saving tools of communication. Even today, many of these methods still apply in remote survival. Signal mirrors, emergency whistles, and smoke plumes are all taught in modern survival training, proving that sometimes the oldest signals still ring the loudest. Hack 11. Pickling and drying. Preserving harvests without refrigeration. For medieval people, the real danger wasn't just winter, it was running out of food halfway through it. So how did they make sure their harvests lasted? By mastering the art of preservation without refrigeration, specifically through drying, pickling and storing. Let's start with drying. Vegetables, fruits and herbs were sun-dried or smoke-dried, often hung from rafters inside homes or barns. Meat and fish were cut into strips and smoked or air-dried, creating jerky-like sustenance that could last for months. Pickling was another key method. Cucumbers, onions, cabbage and even eggs were stored in vinegar or salt brine inside ceramic or glass jars. The acid created an environment where bacteria couldn't survive. Fermented pickles, in particular, offered not just shelf life but vital nutrients during times of scarcity. People used clay pots, barrels and wooden boxes lined with straw or cloth to keep these items dry, cool and rodent-proof. Some households had a separate storage room dedicated entirely to preserved foods. These foods weren't luxuries. They were survival backups. If crops failed or livestock were lost, the difference between life and death could be a few jars of dried apples or a barrel of salted pork. Modern preppers still rely on these methods. Vacuum sealing is just an advanced form of what medieval people achieved with wind, salt, and sunlight. Hack 12. Passive heating, architecture that fights the cold. While insulation like moss and manure helped retain heat, the way homes were built in the medieval world also played a major role in survival during cold months. Peasant cottages were small and low-ceilinged, often with just 1 or 2 rooms. Why? Because smaller spaces heat faster and retain warmth better, especially when your only source of heat is a single fireplace or a clay oven. Many homes were built with south-facing entrances and windows to catch sunlight during the day. Thick walls of clay or stone retained heat long after the fire had gone out, radiating warmth through the night. Even placement of beds and storage mattered. People often slept in box beds, enclosed sleeping compartments made of wood that trapped body heat and blocked drafts. Entire families often slept in one room, with livestock nearby, not just for convenience, but because animals generate body heat that could raise the room temperature by several degrees. In wealthier homes and monasteries, fireplaces were designed to channel heat through multiple rooms using stone ducts and vents, an early version of central heating in principle. Today's architects are borrowing from these techniques. Passive solar design, thermal mass walls, and compact house construction are all modern twists on medieval wisdom. Hack 13. Pest control without chemicals, smoke, ash, and cats. Keeping your food safe was a never-ending war, and the enemies weren't just starvation and spoilage, they were smaller, sneakier, and far more relentless. Rats, insects, and other pests. In a world without synthetic sprays or electric traps, medieval people relied on natural pest control. One of their best weapons? Cats. Cats weren't just pets, they were tools. Villages, monasteries, and households kept cats, specifically to control rodent populations. A good mouser was so valuable that in some places harming a cat was a punishable offense. But animals weren't their only defense. Fireplace ash was often sprinkled around food storage areas to deter crawling insects. The fine dust suffocated bugs and disrupted their scent trails. Some even mixed it with herbs like mint or bay leaves, whose strong scents repelled beetles and moths. Smoke played a double role too. It preserved meat, but it also discouraged pests. Smokehouses didn't just cure food, they doubled as clean zones where flies, maggots, and vermin were far less likely to enter. Even planting was strategic. Crops like garlic, onions, and marigolds were grown near gardens and grain stores because their smells naturally repelled pests. Today we call this organic pest management. Back then, it was survival through simplicity. Hack 14. Ice houses and snow storage. Medieval cold chains. Before the invention of refrigeration, storing perishable food during warmer months was a major challenge, but the medieval world came up with a clever workaround: ice houses. An ice house was a partially underground chamber often built near rivers or forests. During winter, snow and blocks of ice were collected and packed tightly into these pits, layered with straw, sawdust, or dry leaves for insulation. The cooler the region, the deeper and better sealed the pit. These icy stores could last into summer, keeping meat, butter, or even wine chilled for months. In noble estates or monasteries, full-scale ice cellars were common, some with stone walls and drainage systems to remove meltwater. This wasn't just for luxury. In times of medical emergencies like treating fevers or injuries, ice was invaluable. It also allowed for seasonal preservation of certain foods that couldn't be salted or dried without spoilage. Think about it. No electricity, no fans, no machines, just snow, straw, and the wisdom of insulation. Many modern root cellars, off-grid fridges, and even cold storage bunkers use these same passive cooling concepts today. Hack 15. Clothing as shelter, the right material, the right way in the Middle Ages. Your clothing wasn't a fashion statement, it was your first line of defense against the elements. Medieval folks didn't have synthetic insulation or waterproof jackets, but they knew the science of fibers better than we think. Wool was the holy grail. It stayed warm even when wet, making it the ideal choice for cloaks, tunics, and socks. Linen, worn underneath, wickered away sweat and prevented irritation. On top of that, fur-lined cloaks or hoods provided an outer barrier against snow and wind. Clothing layers weren't randomly stacked, they were chosen with purpose. Those working outdoors had detachable sleeves, waterproofed leather capes, and even oiled cloths that repelled moisture. Peasants often reused worn-out blankets as outerwear, stitched into wraps or hoods. They also used natural dyes and wax treatments to seal fabric against water and wind. Even footwear, like leather boots packed with straw or wool, acted as both insulators and padding for rough terrain. In essence, every item worn was a mobile shelter, tested and refined over generations. Today, technical outdoor gear mimics these functions with the exact same principles, just newer materials. Hack 16. The survival mindset. Adaptability over comfort. This final hack isn't physical, mental, and possibly the most important of all. Medieval survival wasn't just about tools or techniques, it was about mindset, the ability to endure, adapt, and stay alert in a world that changed constantly. People worked with what they had. They didn't expect luxury, nor did they rely on a centralized system to rescue them. Resourcefulness was instinctive. If the crop failed, they bartered. If the roof collapsed, they rebuilt. If a disease struck, they turned to herbs, prayers, and endurance. Every child grew up learning survival from birth, how to build a fire, sew a cloak, tend a garden, or care for animals. There was no plan B, just plan make it work. Today, with all our tech and comfort, this mindset is rarer, but it's coming back. Preppers, homesteaders, minimalists. Many are rediscovering that self-reliance isn't just nostalgic, it's essential. In the end, Medieval survival wasn't about fear, it was about adapting with courage, and that's a hack that never goes out of style. To think you couldn't survive back then. After exploring all 16 of these hacks, one thing is clear. Medieval people weren't backward. They were brilliantly resilient, from preserving food with smoke and salt to turning simple clothes into full-body insulation, to creating emergency alert systems using bells and horns. They mastered survival with minimal resources and maximum intelligence. And what's more impressive, many of their methods still work today. So, if the power goes out tomorrow, if your gadgets fail, if modern systems break down, maybe the answer won't be in your app store. Maybe it'll be buried in a root cellar or written in an old monk's notebook. If this video blew your mind or made you rethink medieval life, hit that like button so the algorithm knows people still care about ancient wisdom. Got a favorite hack from this list? Or better yet, know an old survival trick passed down from your grandparents? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe, because in the next video, we're diving deep into how medieval women ran entire villages behind the scenes through medicine, trade, and hidden power. Old world knowledge isn't dead, it's just waiting to be rediscovered. See you in the next one.